Hello, I'm Helen Cahoon. My background is in science and medicine, and I've worked in the life sciences industry since 1988 for biotechnology, pharmaceutical and medical device companies. Yes, I'm CEO of Pleiad Inc. We are a clinical research organization, and we give regulatory advice and set up and manage clinical trials for medical device manufacturers. Pleiad's business has changed in lots of different ways. We've grown as an organization, and we've also become involved in the current trend in medical devices, which is for much more sophisticated and complex devices, and also working with more combination products than we did before. The revision to the Medical Devices Directive has meant that we've seen an increase both in the number of clinical trials that we've been asked to run for medical device companies, and also an increase in the number of clinical evaluation reports that we've written. And so the mandate for more clinical data or more clinical information has meant an increase in volume of our business and an increase in sophistication and size of the clinical trials that we are running. I think the big regulatory challenges in the devices world relate to the increasing sophistication of the medical devices that are being developed. That's both in terms of their complexity, in terms of the types of diseases that they are treating, and also the fact that they blur the lines between drug and device often, either because there's a drug delivery technology that's very sophisticated, or because there's some medicinal component to the medical device. So the main difference, I think, between drug trials and medical device trials is the logistical preparation that you have to do and the training that you have to do with those sites. Device trials can be logistically much more challenging, particularly with implanted devices. And monitoring is a little bit more difficult if most of your trial is taking place in the, let's say, the emergency room or the operating room. So one of the big differences between monitors for pharmaceutical trials and for device trials is that the monitors for device trials tend to have a much more technical background. So they tend to be physician's assistants or technicians or nurses, whereas for drug trials they tend to be have more of a science background, so that they understand the pharmacology of the drug and potential interactions. I think there are two ways that technology impacts medical device clinical trials. The first is just the fact that medical devices themselves are more technologically advanced and they are more sophisticated and complex. In terms of running a clinical trial, there are technologies which really are being introduced much more on the medical device side, which have been around in the pharma side for quite some time, and I'm thinking of things like electronic data capture. Those systems make running clinical trials much easier, much more streamlined, and I think they're gradually being introduced into the devices world. And I think that makes the clinical trials much more robust, actually. Well, there are two aspects to translation in medical device clinical trials. The first is the instructions for use. Now, in a clinical trial setting, most of the people who are actually deploying and using a medical device will understand English and be able to work with English instructions for use. But increasingly, medical devices are being used by patients and carers, and then you really need to have the instructions for use very carefully translated into the first language of the person who's using the device. And it becomes ever more complicated because we are performing more human factors or usability studies for medical devices that are used by patients themselves. And then you're not only having to ensure that patients can understand and follow the instructions, but also, if the English is not their first language, that you have a very robust translation, because that really forms the basis of the instructions that the patient is being tested on to see whether they can follow them or not. The other aspect is doing multinational clinical trials where we need patient questionnaires, informed consents, all translated into the local language. Sometimes even I think we need to have American English translated into English sometimes, because sometimes there are subtleties in the wording of these documents that need to be taken account of.